American experience is a little bit different than others, and so we really wanted to highlight that and create a space for people to be able to share in the community and find other Japanese American people. I know for me, and I don't know for the other panelists, I think I can name like less than 10 Japanese American queer people, and I met a lot more through the committee working on this project here, but before that I could probably name like 3 people total. And so being able to be a part of this project has been very exciting to find a community that I've never been able to find before. So a little bit of history about Tadaima is that we are actually kind of a sister organization to Okairi, which some people may have heard about, which is an organization that started down in LA with Barsha Aizumi, who has a transgender son who wanted to create a space in LA, SoCal area, to be able to have these same conversations. And so one of our members, Como, who went to that event, thought it was really great and wanted to bring it up here. And so we have a different name than they do, kind of based off of Okairi, which means welcome home, and ours is Tadaima, which is I'm here. So kind of as Amy and I have talked about this in the past, it's kind of more of an activist sense to be like, hey, I'm home, accept me, versus welcome home, which is still great, but we're kind of more have an attitude up here. So today what we're going to be doing is we're going to be sharing our stories panel. This month is LGBT History Month, as well as National Coming Out Day just kind of passed, so we're trying to do something in theme with the months. And with that, I want to kind of start off our panel, but I have a couple of like opening things that we need to talk about. So one is kind of a safe space. This is a safe space for us all to be able to ask questions and learn from each other. The panelists have agreed to be willing to answer questions that the audience has, as long as they're done so in a respectful manner. I don't think I have a problem with that today, but my college experience always tells me to do that kind of prompt, just in case. The other thing, too, is if you don't know the language to ask a question, feel free to use the language that you have, and we'll help you learn appropriate language to be able to ask that question or to be able to talk about that issue in the future. So is that something we can all agree upon? Just another note, we do have filming going on. The filming is not going to be the audience at all, but we do have somebody taking photos. Is there anybody that's not okay being in any sort of pictures at all? No? Okay, all right. So, thank you. So with that, I'm going to introduce our panelists. So, first up we have Amy Suyoshi. She is the Associate Dean of the College of Ethnic Studies at San Francisco State University. She began teaching at SF State in 2002 as an assistant professor hired jointly in race and resistance studies and sexuality studies. And most of her responsibilities are now administrative, assisting the 5 units of College of Ethnic Studies with curriculum and faculty development. She continues to teach 1 course a year on a volunteer basis for either race and resistance studies or sexuality studies. Amy is a historian by training, specializing in sexuality, gender, and race. She holds a BA from Barnard College and a PhD from UCLA. She's the author of Queer Compulsions, Race, Nation, and Sexuality in the Affairs of Young Noguchi, 2012 publication. She has a second book manuscript titled Sex Acts, Race, Leisure, and Power in Turn of the Century San Francisco, under review at University of Colorado Press. She has published and lectured on a number of issues on race and sexuality, such as cross-dressing, pornography, and marriage equality. So everybody welcome Amy Suyoshi.
Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. Thanks also to Como Gabro and Bonnie Sumiyama for inviting me to this pre-Tadaima event. I'm very honored to be here with all of you today to share my thoughts on coming out, as well as my own personal experience. Some of you already know about Tadaima. Bonnie gave you a brief overview, but I just wanted to talk a little bit more about this historic set of events that will be taking place over the course of 8 months from now until April 2016. So let me begin with Tadaima's coming out story, particularly for our first pre-Tadaima event. I first heard about Okairi, an LGBT gathering in Southern California for queers and their allies, the summer before it was going to take place in 2014. It seems so incredible for a gay community to formally welcome queers back into their communities as an organized event. Okaeri seemed particularly fitting as a name since that's what the person who lives in the home says to folks who are coming home. In other words, in the Okaeri construction, it could only be allies saying, Okaeri, to welcome queers back into the community. As a figurative device, it might signal the gathering is geared for allies who hope to publicly demonstrate their embrace of LGBT people, and in doing so, convert other straight folks to do the same. In Northern California, I understand the event had to be renamed as Tadaima, since Okaeri organizers thought it would cause confusion to have two events named the same thing. But I thought, as Bonnie mentioned, how fitting that Northern California one be named Tadaima, since it is in fact the one who is outside of the home who returns home with saying Tadaima. Thus, in the naming, the gathering could be more centrally framed around queers rather than straight folks. Indeed, Tadaima might be the JA version of one radical direct action group's popular slogan from the 1990s. We're queer, we're here, get used to it. Having a gathering framed around Tadaima rather than Okaeri means that in theory, the content should focus on the queer community, for the queer community, rather than a focus on allies who hope to bring more tolerance among straights. To be clear, Tadaima is a demand, like, hey, I'm here, whereas Okaeri is a gesture, like, welcome home, honey. I bring this up only because it seems so much scary to demand acceptance rather than to throw yourself into a space that is already embracing. Indeed, one typically says Tadaima before there's a response to Okaeri. What happens if we show up at home to say Tadaima and there's no response? No one welcomes us. Or worse yet, we get to the door and it's locked, that the keys changed. Many of us have left the JA community to organize across multi-ethnic and or multi-issue coalitions since we felt alienated within our own families. And ironically, it might even be less about our own alienation than the embarrassment and awkwardness that we might bring to our families with each public coming out. And so it is today that I throw myself at your feet in trepidation and say, Tadaima. As I share personal stories of coming out, I ask that you treat my family with warmth and respect, even as they may fear the worst, their queer cousin, niece, or daughter talking about being queer. I was born in 1971 in San Francisco to an Okinawan Kibe Nisei father from Hilo and a Shin-Nisei mother from Tokyo. I was the youngest of 3 children and I learned how to ride my tricycle in the outer avenues near the beach before my family moved to San Mateo. My father worked for Bank of Tokyo, which later became California First Bank, since according to my mother, he could never find work with an American company due to racism and xenophobia. My mother started off doing piecework for some large garment factory before she went back to school to earn her license to teach Japanese to non-Japanese speakers. She would later become one of the founding teachers at the Japanese language school, or Oshuko, subsidized by the Japanese government, and then additionally taught students privately in her home. Later, she was able to get a job at the East Asian Library at Stanford, checking the Japanese citations in the card catalog and ordering new books from publishers in Japan. She held 3 jobs while I was growing up, and I continued to be moved at how much she hustled to earn money with the little English skills she had. At the age of 80, she continues to volunteer to teach a weekly class at the Japanese American Community Center in San Mateo. She loves it, and she's always talking about the older Nisei and Sansei students. You should all check it out. It's free. As a child, I always had crushes on boys, which was pretty conventional, but also had short hair and wore my brother's hand-me-downs, which was unconventional for a girl in the 1970s and 80s. I was consistently mistaken for a boy, and I remember I used to get so mad. At the same time, I hated being a girl and wanted to be a boy, which also may not be unusual for girls who are particularly hard-headed, as my mother would say. I had a few of the classic signs of being a future lesbian. I was very fond of the character Joe on The Facts of Life, and the butchy Kate Jackson was my favorite Charlie's Angel. In the end, though, it blindsided both me and my family when I came out as queer at the age of 26. I had a number of one-year relationships with men with no hiccups. I found the relationships fulfilling enough, and if you choose to define sexual orientation by sexual response, I had enjoyable sex, no problem with men. One summer when I came home from college, I even asked my mother, "Aren't you glad I'm not gay?" Her response was, "Don't be so stupid." It's also true that I grew up fairly sexually repressed. My parents never talked about sex, and she, same mothers, are usually not encouraging their daughters to explore their sexuality. Our household definitely seemed to be a sphere in which sex did not exist. In other words, I had no words or desire to assert any sexual agency. Until my mid-20s, I was fairly nervous about getting physically intimate with a guy. It would take me 3 to 6 weeks to kiss a new boyfriend, but it seemed understandable under the circumstances. I am also a survivor of childhood sexual abuse, which is also fairly common for girls. Statistics show that 1 in 3 women in the US have experienced some form of sexual violence, and that number, experts note, is likely way lower than the actual number, since sexual violence is also underreported. Once I started having sex, though, with a guy, all seemed to be no problem. What is interesting is that as soon as I switched teams, I had no problem kissing women I barely knew, on street corners and dark bars. In the past, during more homophobic days, the psychiatric community used to say that sexual abuse causes same-sex sexuality. But I used to like to joke with people that my abuse delayed me from coming out, since I thought it was totally normal for a person with my sexual history to not want to kiss a guy. As much as many may think that I am a late bloomer, I also learned later that people of color, women, and of course women of color, tend to come out later, since they have so much they are dealing with. The last thing they are thinking about is their sexuality. No doubt the burdens of taking care of my immigrant parents as the youngest and only daughter, plus the hurdles that structural racism and sexism bring, kept me way too busy to even think about things I wanted in life, particularly in the romance department. It was not until I joined the Peace Corps and made intense female friendships with other US volunteers that I began to think that I might like women more than men. Growing up on the peninsula, I'd always been surrounded by Asians, and I gravitated towards a mostly all-Asian crew of friends, who also had immigrant parents. It wasn't until I went to Peace Corps that I had to socialize with white folks. The white women were a totally new world to me. They were so loving and generous, so articulate, and so able to express their own needs. I would come into the Peace Corps house once a month, get my check, and they would all be gathered, getting dinner ready, hanging out, throwing barbs at each other with amazing wit and humor. And I would always be welcome to simply come sit at the table and join them. Notably, none of the women would be queer, except for the one who would become my best friend while I was in Cameroon. After my service, I came back, and my relationships with my friends, all Asian Americans, whom I sorely missed while I was away, seemed to be emotionally empty. My relationship with my boyfriend at the time seemed particularly unrewarding. And instead of simply finding a new boyfriend, which is what a normal person might do, I decided that I might be queer. It wouldn't be a whole year later, when I was in graduate school at UCLA, that I would actually come out. In LA, I really had the space to take care of myself more. I exercised furiously to get through the piles of reading, and I ate only salad since I was on a super tight budget as a student. I lost a lot of weight, and I began a new relationship to my body. Men also started to ask me out on dates, which I thought was incredible. Never before had I thought of myself as attractive. I was still questioning my sexuality, and my best friend from Peace Corps kept asking me if I had found any woman cute, since being a dyke was about being sexually attracted to women. And it wasn't until I hosted an old college buddy who was out in LA with a consulting company that something stirred inside of me. I went to a party with my friend Sophia, and she reintroduced me to this super butch dyke named Suzanne, and I felt like my insides were slipping out. We started going out on dates. But of course the relationship was dysfunctional, as many first relationships are, and we broke up after 6 months or so. A messy, messy breakup. At any rate, it started me on the road to knowing that I was a dyke. The most moving part about coming out was less about recognizing my sexual attraction to women and more about finding folks whose gender was just like mine. I never felt wholly woman, though I seemed to reap all the consequences of being part of the social class of being a woman. In this new world, I felt whole as genderqueer. I came out to my family a year later after I passed my comprehensive exams, which is the most grueling and horrible exam in any PhD program. And I had met a person who I thought at the time I would be with for the rest of my life. This was 1996. I took each of my family members aside and came out to them individually. For my mom in particular, I took extra care to put together a package. I wrote a letter and then translated it into Japanese. I enclosed Japanese language pamphlets from ACUR, the LGBT rights organization in Japan. I even enclosed a videotape of other Asian parents talking about their queer kids coming out, which I got from the APIP flag. The response was not ideal, to put it mildly. I don't want to talk too much about it right now, since my family has come such a long way, and there's no productivity in shaming them publicly for their shortcomings in the past. To make a long story short, it took 10 years for my mom to come around. And my brother's family has come around at the same pace that America has come around as queer has become increasingly mainstream. My father, unfortunately, passed away before he could ideologically evolve. And my other brother generally is checked out. He's neither supportive nor unsupportive. I have 2 cousins, one in Osaka, another in Gardena, who are extremely supportive. I have many more cousins not too far from here who have been explicitly homophobic while avoid like the plague. They are less likely homophobic nowadays publicly, since it's becoming increasingly uncool to be so hateful or fearful. But honestly, I don't have the energy to find out. It's precisely like stepping into a space to say Tadaima, not knowing what the response will be. Despite my rather abrupt and explicit coming out to my family, I staunchly believe that each person has their own way of coming out. A number of activists as well as scholars have published on how people of color can be out without explicitly saying they are gay in an effort not to disrupt their families and their communities. White queers seem so ready to give up their families. They don't accept me, then forget them, is their mantra. For people of color who face racism daily, we have more at stake. If we lost our communities and our families, where would we go? Is the white person in the marina going to take you in when you're hungry and homeless? Or will it be your mom or your pastor in Vallejo or Daly City? Moreover, how can we forsake our families who depend on us to sort through their bills, Medicaid, or just plain survival in America? After all, my mom has suffered to raise me. It would be heartless for me to abandon her. And so, in all likelihood, I didn't even have to come out in such an extreme fashion. My family would have quietly invited whomever I was dating to whatever dinner function they held. Why don't you bring your tomodachi, they might say. But in fact, this person would be my homodachi. But it's better for me to live openly, and I'm happy for it, despite the first 10 years of extreme pain. Coming out, as you all know, is also a lifetime affair. There's not just one coming out, and then it's done. In fact, every time you meet a new person, there's like a moment when you have to figure out if you're going to come out or not. I am in fact fortunate enough to look queer, so there's very little that needs to be spoken. I have the privilege of getting a wink or a smile from the gay guy, as well as the curse of getting dirty looks from homophobes. My biggest problems come from strangers who become confused about my gender each time I step out of San Francisco, and it's frankly exhausting. Increasingly, it's happening within the city as well, with the influx of new labor who are unaccustomed to gender queers. But none of this is new for those of you who are queer in the room. It's the constant pressure of having our genders or sexualities being policed by a public who doesn't know us. This is the reality of coming out or just simply being read. For me, and likely other queers, coming out stories are a sign of empowerment and intimacy. It brings us closer to one another and marking our struggle as similar. In particular, it breeds empathy and love for one another when our families seem not so supportive. Just this past year, I've been inspired by two friends who have demanded more parental acceptance of their sexuality. I can certainly bear the continued homophobic slights from my family if my friends can defy their parents' explicit denouncement of their same-sex partners, including their stark absence at their weddings. I wonder, though, what coming out means for straight allies. It seems at times that coming out stories for straight folks can create this spectacle of suffering, and only through suffering or some sort of deprivation will straight folks come to feel compassion for us, love us, and contribute to our cause. I wonder if allies could love and affirm us simply for being different, rather than feeling bad for us, for all the ways in which we cannot live in the world as straight people. Indeed, why does sexual orientation and gender identity have to be something unchangeable or hardwired, one of God's creations, for it to be acceptable? This logic seems to assume at its very foundation that being queer is wrong. In a world that is truly accepting of difference, we should be able to simply choose who we are and who we love, even if we aren't, in the words of Lady Gaga, born this way. And for an increasing number among us who have and will have remarkably supportive families and communities as we come out, I hope that their lives too will move straight to support a social revolution that discards heterosexuality and gender binaries in structuring American society. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to go next. So my name is Bonnie Sugiyama. I'm the director of the Pride Center and the Gender Equity Center at San Jose State University. I've been there for 7 years now, starting on my 8th. And I've been working in higher ed for over 10 years at various other universities, working on LGBT and gender-related issues. My story starts out similarly, kind of similarly to Amy's. In fact, it was just the Hawaii background. My background is my Japanese family immigrated to Hawaii, but I am fourth generation or Yonsei, and I am also Hapa, so I'm mixed Japanese American and European American, many different European American identities involved with that. So my experience is much different in that I grew up here in California with a mixed background. Unfortunately for me, a lot of times you will see Japanese women with white men, and it was kind of reversed in my case, which is very unusual actually. I think the statistics that I saw, it's like 1 in 8 relationships is where the male is Japanese, because Asian men are so kind of demasculinized in the eyes of society that they're not seen as desirable or attractive. And so my experience is much different, and finding other people who actually have Japanese fathers is even more of a search. So my story starts probably somewhere around the age of, I guess I can start back even further. So around the age of 5, I knew something was very different about me, because people would point it out all the time. Like Amy, I was pretty much a tomboy from a very young age. And so the thing that used to stick out to me the most was that I was acting gender inappropriate. And I kind of had an attitude, and I didn't really care if people could just deal with it. So that's when I first noticed that there was something different that people started pointing out about me. It was around the 8th grade, high school time that I figured out that I would like women. And from that point on, I had a really tough time. My mom was Lutheran, a very devout Lutheran, and very, very involved in the church. And I was also very involved and volunteered for a lot of things, and so that was a very difficult time to realize that and think that, oh, I was going to go to hell just because of this one aspect of me. Even though I was a good person, I did well in school, I was a good kid, I never got in trouble. And so that was a really difficult thing that I had to deal with throughout high school. And growing up in I'm from the Central Valley, so Manteca, Modesto, Stockton area, aka the Bible Belt of California, not the most favorable place to be coming out. I went to high school in the early 90s, I graduated in 95, so kind of gives you an idea of it at the time then. I like to call it BE, or Before Ellen came out on her TV show. The media was much different during that time, but before 1998, as far as how they treated the LGBT community. It was very, very negative. And Ellen really kind of kicked open that door because it led the way to having Will and Grace be on TV and be something that was acceptable. So, like I said, the time was very different, and so I didn't come out, I didn't talk to anybody about it for fear of being kicked out of my house. For about 5 years, I didn't come out until high school, or until college, really my second year in college, but I knew the whole time exactly who I was, and so I didn't even like tell any like close friends. Like I lived 5 years like in silence. It was in 1996 I joined what's called the Rainbow Generation Club at Modesto Junior College, where I was going to school, and that really kind of saved me. I was ready to just like kick down the closet door at that time. And my mom also was the one growing up who was the one that taught me a lot about social justice issues. My dad really and I didn't really talk too much. We had more of a father-son relationship. We talked a lot about business. We talked a lot about stocks. I have a younger sister, so I'm the eldest in my family. So in Japanese hierarchy, I'm the one that like kind of everything falls to. So fortunately, I didn't have a brother. Otherwise, he would have been that. But so that's the kind of relationship that my dad and I had. So, and he was a person that I at least wanted to disappoint. So my mom then was the first one that I came out to, besides my sister and some other folks in my kind of core family. And for my mom, she's very much kind of like a book learner, and so I try to approach things and like meeting the person where they're at. So I was taking a summer school class in English, and I decided, well, I'm gonna write on like LGBT history, so I'm gonna ask my mom to buy like for money for books and tell her what I'm gonna buy what the books are gonna be. So I was like, oh, Mom, can I have money to buy some like LGBT history books because I'm gonna write a paper on it. So she was like, oh, okay, whatever. And so I was like, oh, well, she didn't bat an eye about that, so maybe it'll be okay to come out to her. So I set October 11th as the date to come out to her. It was 1996 at the time, so it's been 19 years since I came out to my mom. And she just kind of looked at me and was like, when I said that I'm gay, she was like, oh, well, I just was kind of wondering for the past few months. And my reaction to that internally was like, the past few months? You see my entire life? Like, really? Like, my parents are a little naive to some stuff. My mom was very naive. My dad, maybe sometimes he kind of pays attention, but maybe not. But I like completely cut off all my hair. I had really long hair and had like super like shaved it down, and so I was just like really confused at her response. But whatever, she was fine with it. She was okay. And for the most part, she's the only thing that she now says that's any sort of like negative thing to me is like, oh, I miss your hair. Like every now and then, that's I'm like, oh, guilty. So that was fine, but like me and my dad's relationship was much, much different. We did not talk about it for years, even though everybody else in the family knew. So even growing up, before I came out to my mom and my dad, my grandmother, my Japanese grandmother, knew, and she was the one that's like the most in tune with everything. It's kind of like she just knows everything going on in the family before you even like said anything. And so when I started showing signs of coming out, she was the first one that was just like kind of just joked around with me, just like let me know that it was okay. And like her space, like her house was a safe space for me able to be who I was going through school. Because her house was closer to my college than my parents' house was, so I would go there between classes and she would make me food, and it was great and awesome. So coming out to my dad, that was a whole other story. I'd have girlfriends over to like family gatherings. Everybody knew who this person was. But my dad even knew who this person was, but we didn't like say the words. We didn't acknowledge anything, nothing. And I'm probably like the most terrible child in the way that I came out to my dad. The first time was probably, and I said the first time because I'm not quite sure if he knew from this point, but I'm not sure. So I was doing a panel in 1998. I don't know if anybody remembers Matthew Shepard in that time. It was actually during the time right after Matthew Shepard had been beaten, before he had passed away from the beating. So for those of you who don't know, Matthew Shepard was horrifically beaten in Wyoming, and it was a really large case, and it's actually the National Hate Crimes case is named, legislation is named after him, and I can't remember what the guy's first name was. But so that was a really big deal. It was like one of the first really large national cases where the nation was actually upset by a queer person being beaten and brutally, like very brutally murdered. He passed away 7 to 10 days later. So this panel was like in between that time when he was still alive. And I thought for sure, so I was on this panel like talking to Minnesota junior college students about being queer, and I thought for sure, I saw the press photographer there, and they're taking photos of us, just like we're sitting here today, and I thought for sure that the best story would be the Reverend who was queer and talking on this panel. I thought for sure she would be the one that would be on the front page of the paper. No, it was me. Actually, it wasn't the front page, it was the front page of the B section. So I was really excited to go read this section the next day, just like read this article, and like see it being, talked about. I figured my parents wouldn't actually read the article. They had no clue, like why would they have an interest in reading this article? And then I saw my picture there, and I was like, oh, crap. I'm gonna like just take this piece out of the paper. Maybe they'll not notice that the B section's missing. So I was very young and naive at the time. So thinking, oh, I took it out. They're not gonna see it. It's fine. But then later on, probably like maybe 5 or 10 years later, I was like, oh. Well, everybody else in the neighborhood got the paper too. So maybe somebody said something to my parents and my dad just didn't say anything. So it's possible that that's how I came out to him the first time, but we never talked about it. So that didn't really happen. But when I did come out to him accidentally, was in the year 2000, there was a Proposition 22, which is the Defense of Marriage Act, and California was trying to, there's a lot of other states that were talking about passive marriage equality in their states. And how marriage works is if you get married in one state, right, another state recognizes it. Well, there are a lot of states that were passing laws to keep that from happening. So if somebody got married in Massachusetts, their marriage wouldn't count in California because there would be a law against it, and there was a law against it because that resolution did pass. But, so my city council in Antigua was wanting to be a city that like kind of approved this process, and so I was like, all right, I'm going to go to the city council meeting, I'm speaking against it because I was homegrown in Antigua, and like, you think that you can like make people queer. Well, I had like the straightest like upbringing ever. I have no history of any sort of drugs, alcohol, sexual abuse, anything. I had like the fairy tale childhood growing up, and like I'm still queer, so like screw you all. It's kind of my attitude. And so I went home. I was going to school in Sacramento. I was going to Sac State at the time, and I came home and I told my mom that I was going to go speak at the city council meeting, and she was like, all right. So then I went. And it was not so happy time there. I was like one of 2 people who were against what they were doing. And I came back home and I saw my mom at the door, and I was like, oh yeah, they broadcast these things on TV. I'm wondering why she's like standing at the door. So I got up to the door and I was like, oh, did you see it? And she's like, yeah. And I looked over, my dad's sitting there, and I was like, did Dad see it? And she's like, yeah. I was like, oh no, now we have to talk about it? Like, we didn't talk about our feelings at all. I come from a family like where we do not say like I love you. To give you an idea of this, like my sister, like 5 years ago, my sister called me and she was like, Dad said I love you on the phone. And I got so freaked out I hung up on him. And then she's like, and then I called him back and she said, I love you too. And then they were both awkward, they're like, okay, and then they hung up. So like that's a like a ridiculous we just didn't talk, we just didn't communicate. We barely even hugged. Like we only started doing that after my grandmother passed away in 1998. So this was like 2 years after that. And so I was like super emotional. Like a lot of stuff had gone down over at the city council meeting, and I'm like, oh, now I got to deal with my dad like knowing, and that's I actually have to talk about it. So they get bolted for the back room. My dad comes in, and he gives me a hug, and he says he's proud of me. And to recognize like how important that was at the time, like as an adult at that time, like I can remember like my dad was saying that to me like 3 times. Like that was the 3rd time. The first time was when I graduated from junior college with my AA, and the second time was when I installed my car stereo by myself. So like this is a pretty big deal. And since then, like my dad and I's relationship has done really well. He's been very accepting of girlfriends that I brought home, and I couldn't have asked for a better ending, I think. But the in between time like that, I didn't talk about that, was very difficult. Like we didn't talk to each other at all for like the first like 2 years kind of after he figured it out. Like we didn't talk like really at all. Like I knew that he loved me still because he would say the only thing he would say was like, do you need money? Like, because I'm in college. Like, that was the only thing. Like, that was his way of still being able to show support, but he couldn't verbalize like anything besides that. And neither really could I, because if we start talking about it, I would just burst into tears. Just because that's where I was at. Okay, if we still start talking about it now, I might still do that. Because and actually, you know, he's gotten really good. When the Supreme Court ruling came through, he actually texted me a whole bunch of rainbows as a text message, and I was like, oh, he's paying attention. And so little things like that my dad does that that I never would have thought would have happened when I was younger. We have Chris Hayashi, and Chris is the Executive Director of the Transgender Law Center. Chris has been active in social, racial, and economic justice organizing for over 20 years. For the last 10 years, Chris served as the Executive Director and Co-Director of the Audre Lorde Project, a lesbian, gay, bisexual, two-spirit, trans, and gender nonconforming people of color organization center based in New York City. Previously, he served as a trainer-organizer at Western States Center in Portland, Oregon, and as the Executive Director of Youth United for Community Action, a youth organizing group in California led by young people of color organizing for social and environmental justice. Please welcome Chris.
Yeah, you know, I'll start off by saying thanks so much to everyone who put this event together. Just being in this space, I very rarely get to be in spaces like this, and I feel like I'm in like a family event type of thing. So I'm the Executive Director of the Transgender Law Center. We are one of the largest organizations in the country. We're a national organization, but we're based here in Oakland, California, advancing the rights of trans and gender nonconforming people through litigation, public education, policy advocacy, and movement building. We've been around for over 14 years. So I'll start by just talking some about myself. So I actually have kind of similar backgrounds to other folks. I grew up in Seattle, Washington, but all my family's in Hawaii, mostly on Kauai, Honolulu. I'm Beyonce also. So, you know, growing up in Seattle, you know, I was born a girl. I was very gender nonconforming, you know, given some changes, I generally looked like this, and was definitely a tomboy. And, you know, for my kind of early childhood, my parents were okay with that. They were like, oh, tomboy, we get that, it was fine. And then I went to school. And, you know, I think for myself and how I saw myself, you know, I don't know if I fully saw myself as a boy, but I definitely didn't see myself as a girl. And I got to school, and all of a sudden, it was very clear from teachers and other students that how I was and who I was not okay. And you know, for me, that was very, as a young child, was very confusing. That just who I was and how I moved through the world was all of a sudden not okay. Like, it was very clear to me from a very young age that the world was not set up in a way for me to survive. So, you know, I faced a lot of kind of harassment from other students. This kind of continued on from through elementary school into middle school, and you know, and I just honestly really did not know what was the right way for me to be. Like, there was this very, very unfortunate period in middle school where I was like, okay, so if I'm supposed to be a girl, I just need to wear pink. Like, I'm just gonna wear a lot of pink all the time, and then everything will be okay. That was pretty disastrous. So, you know, elementary school, middle school was challenging, and you know, like a lot of other trans youth and gender nonconforming youth, there were definitely days where I didn't want to live. You know, and that was true then, and it's still true today. Fast forward to high school, and you know, I was really lucky in that in high school I kind of fell in with a kind of like alternative crew of other kids, and it was a little easier. I mean, I was still facing some forms of harassment from other students, but it was better because I kind of had this crew of other kids who were also kind of a little weird. But you know, I still kind of had no way to understand kind of who I was. until I went to college. I actually went to college here out in Stanford. And for the first time, met another Asian person who was queer, who was gay, she was lesbian. And, you know, growing up in Seattle, the only images I had seen of gay people were white, primarily white men. So when I met this person, and, you know, she had some friends, this little crew of kind of like, particularly queer Asian woman, I was like, oh, obviously, this is who I am. Like, it was really just, it clicked for me. And so, probably when I was like early 20s, like 21 or 20, was when I came out to my mom as queer. And I kind of had to, because I had gone home to Seattle to get like my wisdom teeth out or something, and I had brought my girlfriend at the time. And I think I was like under, what is called anesthesia, like I think I was really out of it. And my girlfriend was there, and I'm sure that it was very, very obvious to my mom what was happening. I mean, I feel like my mom always knew, I'm sure my dad always knew, like it was pretty obvious. So I wrote her a letter, and I told her that, you know, that I was queer, that I was a woman at the time, and she wrote me a letter back, and she was like, you know, I knew. And she was like, and I love you, and that doesn't change, and don't tell your dad. She was, I mean, my dad was very homophobic. If he could have known about it, he would have been transphobic. She was like, don't tell your dad, he won't understand, kind of thing. And I have a younger sister, and she's always been very supportive around queer issues, trans issues, that kind of thing. So probably around my mid-20s or so was the first time that I actually, I mean, this was a very different time, this would have been in the early mid-90s or so, was the first time that I ever heard of a transgender guy. So someone transitioned female to male. It was just the first time that I ever even knew that that existed and that that was a possibility. And kind of similar to being queer, as soon as I found out, I was like, oh, obviously, you know, this is who I am, and this is kind of the path that I want to go down. You know, that was definitely more of, I think, processing, coming to terms for me of just exactly what that looked like for me to transition from a very strong queer woman of color identified person to transition to being a trans guy. But I just knew that was who I was. That was always who I was, and that was what I needed to do to be, you know, real about who I am. So it actually took me. I told my sister, and she was cool. That was no problem. And my dad actually passed a couple of years after I started transitioning, so I never talked to him about it. And, you know, I mean, people change, but he was very homophobic and transphobic. I think it would have been really challenging for him. And it actually took me a really long time to tell my mom. I started on hormones probably in my late 20s. You know, I had been presenting very much as a guy for a very long time. And I didn't tell my mom probably until my mid-30s, so I had been transitioning for some time. You know, I don't know, my family is very J, like, things are happening and we just do not talk about them. And, you know, people are nice and lovely and caring, but, you know, it was very clear that I looked different than I used to look, but no one said anything, you know. So I decided to talk to my mom about it, and, you know, I basically told her, look, you know, do you know what transgender is? And she said, yeah. And I said, well, you know, that's what I am. And we talked about it a little bit, and it was hard for her. She broke down crying. She was really emotional about it. You know, but in the end, again, she was like, and I feel so fortunate for this. She was like, you know, I don't know if I can I don't know if I can see you as anything but my daughter, but I love you and I want you to be happy, and none of that changes. And for me, like, that was all that mattered, you know. I think it was Leslie Feinberg, who passed earlier this year, wrote Stonebridge Blues, very well-known trans leader, who said that they had people call them the correct pronoun with hate and disrespect, and have had people call them by the wrong pronoun with love and respect and integrity. And for me, that's a lot of how I live too, and that that was what was really important for me, for my mom. So even to this day, like, I'm very public as trans, and she still definitely kind of struggles with pronouns here and there and messes up. But ultimately, to me, it doesn't matter, because I know that she loves me and she cares for me, and she actually, for the first time ever, I mean, I've been doing nonprofit and social justice work for years. Like, she actually donated to the Transgender Law Center this year, which was huge. So she gets a newsletter. Now she's finding out a lot about trans issues. And it is still a struggle for my mom. But just one little story. Shortly after I talked to my mom about being trans, we were back in Hawaii, and it was bone season. My mom's family was in Kauai. And so, she was down at the church helping get ready for the bone dance. It's mostly a lot of older folks there, a lot of who do that type of thing. And my mom was kind of one of the younger people there. And so she had brought me along to help. They were all like, oh, it's so nice that your boy is helping and that kind of thing. And my mom called me her son. And it was the first time that she'd ever done that, and so that was huge for me. And also, and she still slips up. She still slips up. But I just always remember that moment. So, a couple other things, like, so for me, I feel like I am probably one of the most privileged trans people, in the country, except maybe like Caitlyn Jenner or Lauren Collins, or those kind of things. And that, like, I definitely, have had, my mom is accepting, my family is accepting, but I definitely have experienced harassment and discrimination. I've had like airport security guards before I had my ID changed, harass me about my name, and in front of other people, basically being like, just saying, boy, are you a boy, are you a girl, what's happening, like, and this is where you're trying to get to security. I've definitely had doctors, even very recently, going to the doctor, like going to the gynecologist just for like a regular checkup. And, I'm sitting in this waiting room that is mostly and I'm making assumptions, but like woman-identified folks, and waiting for my name to be called, and I'm generally getting super anxious because I don't know if they're going to be like Mrs. Hayashi or Miss Hayashi or what's going to happen. But I make it to that, and I get into the doctor's office, and the doctor, is well-meaning, but it's basically like, why don't you just get a hysterectomy? Why don't you just get rid of everything? Wouldn't you be happier? And I was like, well, is that medically necessary? Is that something that I need to do? And they were just like, no, I just think that you should, maybe that's what you should do. It might make you feel better, kind of thing. And so I was like, well, one, it's not medically necessary, but two, like, there was a total disregard for any idea that maybe I want to have a family. Maybe I want to have children. Like, I think there's this continual kind of idea that trans people are not actually people, that we're not actually people who have families, who want to have children. And so, I definitely have experienced that kind of level of discrimination and harassment. That said, though, and I'm going to kind of shift from talking about myself, the reality for the majority of trans people in this country is that folks are struggling to survive on a daily basis. Since this year began, 22 transgender women have been murdered in this country, the majority of which are transgender women of color. In August, we lost a transgender woman was murdered every week in August. Transgender people face double the unemployment rate of the general population, and for transgender women of color, transgender people of color, it's 3 to 4 times that. In general, despite kind of the burn costs and the increase in visibility that's happened, the majority of transgender people are really struggling to survive on a daily basis. And I know that here in California, there are ways in which California has made a lot of progress, much more so than other states. However, 3 of the murders happened here in California, 1 in the Bay Area. And folks may have heard about this, but there is a ballot initiative that has been put forth by the Pacific Justice Institute, which is the same organization that was fighting against gay marriage, basically that criminalizes transgender people for using the bathroom. It basically says that you need to use the bathroom or any facility within a government building that corresponds with your biological sex as determined by at birth certificate, or the medical examination. Really unclear what that medical examination piece means. And if you're caught in the wrong bathroom, the person who finds you, someone can catch you and sue you for a minimum of $4,000, and can sue the building owners for a minimum of $4,000. So they're collecting signatures for that right now. They have until the end of December. If it makes the ballot, it would be on the November 2016 ballot. And it's very clear that the other side is targeting particular communities. They're targeting immigrant communities, they're targeting the Latino community, and they're targeting API communities to get support, to get this initiative on the ballot. And if this makes the ballot, this will be the largest attack on transgender communities that we've seen in California ever, and possibly in the country. So, we'll definitely be keeping people updated on kind of how that moves, but, just to say that I think forums like this are so critical, because the more that people can understand who transgender people are, and the more that we can build support, the more that people can talk to your neighbors, your families, your friends, your churches about transgender people, and really get people to understand who we are as a community, the stronger we will be when we're facing attacks like this. Thank you.
So now we have probably about half an hour for questions. We'll open it up so that anybody can ask anything they like. Does anybody have any questions that they want to ask? Go ahead.
Not necessarily a question, but just thank you for holding us down. Most of the churches are trying to be more reconciliatory, or whatever the word is. But yet, just recently I found that I'm totally naive and ignorant on the culture that you both represent. And so, just the kind of forums and the kind of communication that you're doing really helps us, even minutely, understand where you are coming from, and hopefully help us guide where the church will be. So I just want to say thank you, because one of the questions I had was, with all the different alphabets, the different determinations, you seem to use the term queer to sort of be all-encompassing. Now, is that acceptable within the community?
That's a very good question. All right, yeah, so the word queer can be very charged depending on which communities you use it in, even within our own community, right? So I think the older population within the LGBT community doesn't always necessarily associate with that word or doesn't like it. But language is funny because some of the older population, some of the gay men I talked to, they like the word fairy, but the younger men don't like it, right? So, because different groups have been called different things. So queer has been kind of taken back. It started, I think, in the early 90s, again, with a lot of college student movement to kind of take back the word and kind of reclaim it. And the word queer being a more kind of overarching umbrella term that is more inclusive than just the word gay. Because gay, while some people see that as being inclusive of the whole community being generally used, it's not, because it doesn't include lesbian, bisexual, transgender, or any of the other identities that fall within the alphabet that we use, two-spirit, two-gender loving, or any intersex. So that's one reason why, you know, using the word queer. Queer has a very political meaning to it as well. And so some people can identify, who are straight. I have students that identify as heterosexual or straight, and they identify as queer because they believe in the political ideology of queerness and being accepting and open to all different identities within the spectrum of gender identity and sexual orientation.
He's kind of drawing out queer meant anyone that's different than you and your friends. And that's more all encompassing.
So I think that in the U.S., typically if you're over 60, you're adverse to the term queer because you're called queer. It's a very strong negative connotation. If you're radically on the far left, you're more likely to adopt the word queer as a political umbrella term. Recently, folks are also saying queer and trans, even though queer includes the word trans. Typically, trans is a marginalized identity that's not recognized within the larger LGBT movement. And so people also are more consciously saying queer and trans. If you go to a place that's more conservative, like LA, where people are more gender normative, women look like women, men look like men, they don't like the word queer. They're more sort of mainstream to the right, politically, within the LGBT movement. So they'll call themselves more likely LGBT, unless they're radically left, and they'll call themselves queer. Most academic disciplines that are thinking about LGBT studies are using the word queer. Queer studies, queer theory, these are all very legitimated, funded departments and programs in universities across the nation.
I think one other thing too is that queer can also be like a personal identity. So like for me, I identify as genderqueer as my gender identity, and I identify my sexual orientation as queer. And I do that because sexual orientation identities are based on what the people's gender are in the relationship. Because I'm genderqueer, like lesbian doesn't fit. And so even though like my primary orientation is attraction to women, so I use the word queer as kind of a general overall identity. If that makes sense. Anybody else have a question?
I grew up in North Dakota, and I had an uncle that was gay. He was my favorite uncle, and he always stayed with us because my mom was the only one that really accepted the fact that he was gay. But I remember the word queer, and it was very negative connotation, so I'm glad that you're turning that around. But yeah, I agree with that. I have to say one other thing. My nephew, my brother's son in Texas, actually came out to my daughter and I a couple of years ago, and he made the comment that he would probably marry a woman because of his father and family. He's getting married April 16th to a woman, and it saddens me. I just wish he could be himself.
Thanks for sharing. Texas is a hard place. Yeah, go ahead.
I have a question about what you introduced this panel course about not knowing very many Japanese Americans who are queer, and I came out really, really late. And so my question to you is, why is that? Because I know a lot of Asian queer, but they're not Japanese American queer. So is there some reflection you can give to that makes sense?
So as all of us know, the Japanese American population is shrinking. There's really been no real significant immigration since 1924, since exclusion. And so part of it is that in comparison, at one point in the US, like 1930, the large number of Asian immigrants in the U.S. were Chinese and Japanese. But with the influx of increased immigrants, right, in post-1965 immigration reform, as well as the various U.S. incursions that have caused wars that have sent refugees also to the U.S., right, there's been more different Asian groups who are coming into the U.S. Still, there's been almost very little, like immigration from Japan has still been a trickle, right? And also, folks aren't having 7 to 8 babies like they normally do. Some people may have just 1 kid, 2 kids, some people may have no kids. And so demographically, the JA population is shrinking rapidly. There's jokes that some people say in the year 2050, JAs will be extinct. There's these kinds of jokes. So part of what you're seeing is not that JAs are, there's fewer JA queers or we don't see them, but actually that the population is shrinking. So we're not going to, there's not going to be as many numbers as other Asian immigrant queers, but then potentially more folks born here. That's my theory.
I think that, and like, for me, I grew up in a very, Caucasian area, and I didn't know a lot of other Asian people. It wasn't until I moved to this area where a large majority of the population is also Asian. So for me, my racial identity has taken longer to develop. Like it was developing then in Antigua because it's very obvious that I was different, but growing up. But I wasn't able to explore that identity because that assimilation was something that was necessary to survive, because I already had a big strike against me for being queer, and I didn't need to add to that. So just now, so that could be why I know less now, even though I'm the age that I am, that I haven't really found a lot of people. But through this process, I'm getting to know a lot more folks.
So there is a JA queer group though for women in trans folk called Omusubi, and it's a listserv that meets maybe once a year for a potluck. It's a little bit, it's not that active, but that's a place you could join. If you want to know how to join, you can ask me and I'll give you Chris Mizutani's email address. So that's just to let folks know that there is Omusubi out there.
Any other questions?
Again, I'm curious. The Japanese community with this church is very close-knit, ethnically sort of congregated. Is it easier for queer people within that community to exist, or is it harder than, say, black within the black community or white within the white community? What is the ethnic togetherness, if I can use that term, that I feel is really strong within the Japanese community? Is that good or bad? Is it positive?
Sorry, I feel like I'm talking too much. My specialty actually is in Asian American Studies as well, what I don't want to do is compare the JA community with other racial or ethnic groups. And part of the reason that I don't want to do that is there's something that's called oppression Olympics, which is kind of very bad. It's when you sort of compare other racial ethnic groups, and then invariably there becomes some kind of judgment or some kind of weight on who's more or less oppressed, and it's not politically useful for a multiracial coalition. But what I would like to speak to is that I think that for the Asian community, as well as for any JA community, as well as many other ethnic communities, that it is super tight, right? And that sometimes it can be very bad and constraining, particularly if the community is tight and homophobic, and it's terrible. But if it's tight and they're queer friendly, then it's great. I think that for many queer APIs, they have a strong sense of obligation to their family, particularly if their parents are immigrants and don't kind of move about the world easily. And so many of us actually, in some ways, I don't want to say sacrifice, but we can't be as out as white folks because we have to always take care and think about our families, which is something that I think is common in many racial and ethnic groups. Kathy Cohen, who's a political scientist, has this book called Boundaries of Blackness, and she talks about how the African American community sometimes has difficulty being as out about their queerness, even though they're accepting of queers in their church, like the choir director is gay, the pastor is gay, but no one really talks about it explicitly. And part of it is because the African American community has been so racially villainized that to have another stigma laid on top of it would be kind of terrible for them. In that same respect, there's a historian named John Howard who talked about JAs in the 1940s in Kenya who were gay but could not come out as gay because JAs were so racially villainized, imprisoned, incarcerated. And so the last thing they needed to do was to be out and to be gay and to have this additional site of kind of terribleness in their lives.
Yeah, I think that's an important aspect that none of us actually really talked about internment. I think, my family was from Hawaii, so nobody was interned from my family. I don't know, similar experiences. Yeah, because I know that's one thing, like when I do connect with other JAs, like, you talk about internment, like, what was your family intern, where were they interned at? You have that conversation. Yeah, so I think it's a missing element of this panel, unfortunately.
Usually, my mom's family is from Hawaii, and so I'm totally out to the rural side. But I have not seen my dad's side since I've been out to myself. And it's just that the dynamics are really different between, hers is also the Okinawa side, his is Southern, and there are sort of these nuances within the community too for me that make my decision, they impact my decision making.
I do think that when you have a deep sense of obligation and sort of compulsion to maintain respectability for your family within the community, that it changes the way that you can sort of be out in the world. And so you're absolutely right that maybe you see more Yonsei around than Sansei. Sansei typically also are older than Yonsei as well. I identify culturally as Nisei because my dad is Kide, my mom's Shinisei. And even when I was in LA, there'd be other children of immigrants it was very hard for them to be out regardless of their ethnicity. So it's what you observe is probably right on. Yeah.
So just for those folks who aren't JA in the audience, we're throwing a lot of terms around as far as generations go. So Issei is first generation, that's the group that immigrated over. Nisei is second generation, Sansei is third generation, and Yonsei is fourth generation. Any other questions? Somebody asked Chris a question and they can talk.
It's okay.
I don't know, I just want to say, and this has something to do with it and not, but Bonnie, you said something about you coming out, you felt like you were going to go to hell. Okay? To me, it's something that I'm passionate about in that the terminology in the Bible and misinterpretation, the whole 9 yards, that eventually everybody sees that because everyone has the opportunity to go to heaven. And for me, that's really important to help everyone learn that.
I think, thank you for that comment. I think for me, how I resolved it was a few things. I had a Bible that I was given for confirmation, and in one of the areas where it's kind of like typically listed, talking about negative about homosexuality, after it said the passage, it says, God hates that. And I was like, that's not what I learned, you know, in church, is saying that God hates things. So then that made me question, like, the printing of the Bible and interpretation, and, like, you know, different languages interpreting different languages. And the other thing that also kind of set it up is just, like, you know, that I was always taught that God is love, and that God doesn't make mistakes. And I was like, you know, after years of kind of like dealing with, you know, trying to figure out, you know, how to deal with it, I was like, you know, this is how I am. So it's not a mistake. And so that's how I resolved it. I mean, I'm not in the church anymore, but when I was younger, that's how I overcame any of the guilt that I had about and concern that I had about who I was.
I just want to say that this goes to the same study that I went to, but homosexuality wasn't even a word. And in the days of Christ, it did not exist. And it wasn't until the late 1800s it became a medical term. And in 1946 is when they started transitioning and retranslating the Bible that included the word homosexual, which makes me very angry. But I think it should be taken out. But anyway, that I think is very important.
Anybody else have any other questions?
Sorry,
Yeah.
I feel like I'm taking a little too much space too, but just appreciate you bringing that up. A couple of us are from the Network on Religion and Justice, or NCI, people, and we have a DVD here. It's really dated. We're trying to update some of our information, but the first part of the DVD is a narrative of different API queer individuals, family members, parents. But interestingly, there's an addendum right on the DVD that is this wonderful Asian American Old Testament scholar who really schools people on how to respond to those proper passages of need, and really gives a lot of historic context. It's really helpful. So there's a few over there. Take them if you know of anyone that you think would be helpful to you. And NRJ, our acronym, is really here to kind of help address the horrible bullying that's been done in the name of spirituality and religion, and yet to help people keep whatever feels authentic to themselves, to grow that in a way that, you know, supports our lives. Help yourself.
Okay, thanks, Doug.
Just wanted to add to this church, church I belong to, the Wesley United Methodist Church, and we within the United Methodist Church, there's been a rapidly growing movement to strike some of the specifically homophobic language out of the book of disciplines of the church, and it's a real big uphill battle. But many churches are coming on board and becoming what's called reconciling congregations, where they say they're basically rejecting those passages in the language in the book of disciplines, because they just really do not believe it's in, Jesus Christ for everyone and God's will. It just doesn't make sense. And there, like Coach said, there's a lot of literature out there. Google it, so it's really good. Kind of they break down, the passages and in terms of language and culture, and a lot of it really makes sense, And so feel free to see me afterwards. Happy to provide some more information to you. But it's a really great movement, and we're just chipping away at it. So I think I'm really happy to see the progress. I think, especially over the last year, it's been remarkable. So we just got to keep it going.
Questions?
I'm wondering, I guess the question is for all three of you, if you have any advice for people who are working through that process today. Because that quietly do that, like, oh, I'm never gonna say anything, but you can kind of just like acknowledge it quietly and never explicitly have to say the words.
Yeah, I really appreciate that question. I mean, I think that, I feel like for each person, it's really, I think it's a really personal kind of decision, and I think that I really believe that however anyone figures out how to kind of navigate and live their lives in what can be really hard situations sometimes, is really to be honored and respected, so I feel like whatever folks decide to do is right for them. And I feel like for me, what's always been really helpful is having a lot of support, friends, community groups, that kind of thing, which, being here in the Bay Area, we're lucky that there's more networks than other places.
I just want to also really say that it doesn't make you less queer, honey, just because you're not out to your parents. So you should always just be proud of who you are and the journey you have to take. There's some things that you should never do is don't ever come out to your parents when you're living in their house or if you're financially dependent on them. Just because you don't know how they're going to react, and then it could be a kind of terrible outcome for you.
I broke those rules. But I didn't know that one. I really did get lucky because at that point, like, I hit a breaking point. I couldn't take it anymore. So it was either that or, I don't know. I kind of did probably the very JA thing, is just brought people to family things and they can figure it out for themselves. Every family is different. So, however you want to do it is important, or if you want to do it at all. But if you're looking for different ways of doing it, my advice is to really evaluate how they intake information and how they respond to things. So like for the example that I gave earlier with my mom, she's very much a book learner. So like I tested like books, something that she really loves. Some people do better with, so I advise students all the time on helping them like figure out ways to connect with their families. So if your family member is somebody who likes to watch a lot of documentaries, find them a documentary on it after you talk to them, like say, this quick conversation, we can talk about it, or here, you can watch this video and we can have a conversation later. Or if they're more verbal and they need to process with other people and they want to talk with other folks, you find organizations or groups that you can say, here's a group that, is supportive like PFLAG, or some other groups where they actually meet and you meet other families that have gone through the same process where they can talk to other folks. So it really kind of depends on how they digest information, and a lot of it is just people need time. Sometimes we want people to be very accepting of us. We figured it out. We want to go tell the world, and we've gone through a long process to kind of figure that out and become okay with ourselves. And we expect people just to love us, which, they should, rightfully so, but they have a lot of layers and years of being socialized to be a certain way. And so sometimes it takes a little bit of forgiveness on our side to maybe not take what they say immediately as face value, because what you're seeing is very, very raw emotion. And maybe if you catch them a little bit later after they've been able to process and been able to filter, maybe they may not be so harsh. So there's a lot of different things.
As a quick question, more of a curiosity. We have been talking about the issue in the context of family or gay culture or religion and Christianity. What are the views of other religions, like Buddhism or Islam? How are they looking at it?
I think you should talk about it on the network. Yeah.
Would you like to? I can't speak for those religions, other than I know that my dad's side of the family, who I'm not out to, is Buddhist side of the family. We also don't have an active Buddhist priest as a part of the Tadaima community, who, I think each of our religions or sects or denominations are reflective of the world. right now, so I'm in an interfaith community, and right now there's a transgender summit happening on Mobile in Berkeley this weekend, so that's interesting as well. So I think it's in small numbers and murmurs that are pushing bigger groups bodies to kind of know and have conversations about this. But I think it's very nice.
I think the person that's on the committee with us, she's a good minister, she has said that philosophically, women are totally open to accepting LGBTQ. However, she said because of our culture and we're in America, we have been rubbed off with other cultures or other American values, so that even in her, I think it's a congregation, even in her church, even though she is lesbian herself, and she's very accepting of others, she finds it very difficult for her church members and family members to even express that they're coming out. So they remain closeted in her church in San Francisco, but she's quite open. So I don't know, I think that's helpful.
I just like to add that both my parents are Buddhists. I grew up Buddhist. I had an extremely hard time coming out. Even just thinking about it makes me sort of want to sob hysterically. It took 10 years for my mom to accept it. Again, I think philosophically, ideologically, there's nothing in the Buddhist text that condemns same-sex sexuality, but there's a host of other pressures that folks face here in the U.S. that where families feel like they need to be respectable, that they don't want to be shamed, right? And so I think it's exactly right about the religion depends on sort of family to family, set to set.
It's all about like cultural background or cultural value.
Yeah.
I think we have, does anybody have like one more question? I will wrap it up. Great, I just want to thank you everybody for all your questions. I want to thank the panelists, Chris and Amy, thank you so much. Amy, wow. I also want to especially thank some of the members on the committee, Kevin, wait, Kevin, I know you're shy, sorry. Wayne, I don't know, Wayne's over there. Nick, taking photos over there, and Colin for all your help with the events, and Como for helping organize it. And if you're on the committee, wave your hand. If you're on the Tadaima committee. So if you would like to come to more of these and find out more about the events that we're having, make sure that you sign in at the front. They'll add you to our email list, and we'll let you know when the events are coming up in the future. You can check out our website, also the TadaimaBayArea.org. And we're also on Facebook too, so add us on Facebook because we'll be promoting all the events through there as well. So thank you very much all for coming tonight. We also have a food truck that's coming. We have a sushi truck, Akita Sushi and Catering. They're here. We're going to go out that side door, and they'll be right out there. And we can come back in and congregate and eat at the tables and have conversation. Congregate? Oh, Freudian slip. All right, so thank you very much everybody for coming. Good night.